All right, guys, I won't be here today, as you can see. I know. Alrighty, so this next section is factoring, and you got to show all your work to get credit. That means for most of this, it's a star, setting up your star and how you set up your factors the way they're supposed to go. I'm going to go through all of that, so if you've forgotten, I'll remind you. Move into this one. So I'm going to set up my star. I'm going to check through my checklist. Step number 1, always check for a GCF. I don't care if you think there is one or not. You check for it anyway. GCF, I've told you, take the smallest number out front. In this case, it's going to be in front of that X, which is a 1. And take the biggest factor of that, which is normally itself, and see if it divides into all of them, and then work your way down. So 1, if that's the only thing that they're going to have in common, obviously we say they don't have a GCF, and we move on to our second step, which is check for a difference of squares. Difference of squares only has 2 terms. That has 3. 1, 2, 3. We don't count 0. That's like y equals. It's the same thing. So we go through here. We have 3 terms. It's not a difference of squares, so we go to our star method. Do not jump straight to the star method on all of these. Do check for those things. It's important. So we're going to set up our star. A times C goes up top. A times C. So in this case is 1 times 16. 16 goes up there. A goes on each side of it, which in this case is 1. And then B goes on the bottom, which in this case is -8. Just as a reminder, A, B, C is where we're getting those numbers, in case you have forgotten that. Now we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to give us 16, that add to give us -8. So we're going to find our factors of 16. So 16, 1 times 16, 2 times 8, and 4 times 4. Now, just look at those pairs of numbers there. Which ones of those could possibly give us 8? And when we look, the only thing we can make out of it is 4 and 4. The problem is 8 needs to be negative. So what I need is -4 and -4. And I can do that because -4 times -4 still gives me positive 16. So that still works. Now I check these sideboards over here and see if they simplify. And I look, I've got a 1 on top, so they definitely don't simplify. So I'm going to write out my factors. 2 sets of parentheses. Top number is my number of x's. Bottom number is a constant that's added or subtracted. So 1x, I just write x minus 4, x minus 4, and that's it. Now, it is possible if it were multiple choice, and you have the option of writing it this way yourself if you would like, is you might see x minus 4 squared. I will accept x minus 4 times x minus 4 is not a problem. But, you've got that option there as well. So just know that you might see it that way. If you do, great. If you don't, that's okay too. Move that out of the way there. Let's see if I can move our answers here. There we go. Stem of that 4 wanted to ride along. Let's put that back. There we go. Now, number 9. I am going to solve all of these. If you don't need me to solve all of these, if you want to skip to the answer to see if you did it right, that's fine. I'm not worried about whether you have the right answer written down. I'm worried about if you know how to do it. So if you check the answers on all of these and you skip until you find one that you missed and go, oh, okay, I figure, and then watch that one, I'm fine with that. But I am going to go through all of these. So if you need to skip through these and just check the answers, do check your answers. But if you need to skip through these and check your answers, I'm fine with that. I know that you may not need all of these, but if you do, I want to give you those examples so you have them. So, first step, I check for a GCF. You always check whether you think it has one or not. This one does not, because that first term is a 1. 1's the only thing they have in common. I check for a difference of squares. It has more than 2 terms, so I'm going to move on to my star method. A times C goes in that top square, so 1 times 9 gives me 9. A goes on each side of it, which is 1, and B goes in the bottom, which is 10. I'm finding factors in 9 that add to give me 10, so I've got 1 and 9, and I've got 3 and 3. Now out of that pair, the 1 and 9 is what gives me 10, so 1 plus 9. So I'm going to put 1 on one of them and 9 in the other. It doesn't matter which one's which. I check to see if either of those sideboards simplify, and I check specifically, do they simplify helpfully? Because 1 over 1 does technically simplify to just 1, but that doesn't help us because we need 2 numbers to fill in our parentheses. So I'm going to set up my 2 sets of parentheses there. Top number is my number of x's. The bottom number is the number I add or subtract. So that's x plus 1 and x plus 9. All right. So I go to number 10. And I check for a difference of squares. I check for a GCF. Check for a GCF. The only thing they have is a 1, so that doesn't help me. So then I check for a difference of squares. My brain's ahead of me. So I check for a difference of squares. I have 2 terms. All right, so that's looking good. I check to see if they're both perfect squares. Well, n squared is n times n, and 64 is 8 times 8. That's on that list I made. So looking good. Am I subtracting? Yes, I am. So I have a difference of squares. Can save myself a little bit of work and just set up my 2 sets of parentheses. So it's going to be what times itself gives me n squared. So that's going to be n, so n times n. What times itself gives me 64? That's going to be 8 times 8. One's got to be plus, one's got to be minus, because I need 8 times 8 to equal negative 64, and the only way to do that is 1 positive, 1 negative. Also, I've just realized that I goofed over here and wrote x's when I should have written m's. All right? I'm sure some of you were yelling at your screen again and correcting me, and I appreciate that. I subconsciously heard you from over the distance. So, the next one, number 11, first thing I do is I check for a GCF, greatest common factor. And I look to see if there's something that will divide evenly into both terms. In this case, there is. Because remember, it's the biggest number or variable that divides evenly into all the terms. It can be both. In this case, it's not. It's just a variable. So I'm going to take the variable with the smallest exponent, which in this case is p. And I'm going to divide the terms by p. So I had p squared, which is like p times p. And I took a p away, so it's just p. Minus, if I think p divided by p, because that's what it is. P squared divided by p is p. Negative p divided by p is negative 1. I always check to see if my squared term is gone. It is. I'm done. That one's a real easy one. Sorry about that. Circle, circle. And there's answer choices in there. Moving along to number 12. Again, reminder, if you're not needing the review on all of these, feel free to skip around and get to something you do actually need. So, number 12. First thing I always check for is a GCF. Take the smallest number out there. So this 3. Does 3 go into 8? It doesn't, so that doesn't work. My only other factor of 3 is 1. And if that's the only factor they have in common, I don't have a GCF. So I check for a difference of squares. It's got more than 2 terms. I move on. I go to my star method. So star method. A times C in that top blank. So 3 times 4 is 12. I write A in my first blank there. B goes on the bottom, which is -8. So I'm looking for factors of 12 that add to give me -8. So that's 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. So I look, the only pair I can make 8 out of is going to be 2 and 6. Now the problem I have is that 2 and 6 are positive and 8 is negative. So I got to think a little bit and realize that it's not just 2 times 6 that gives me positive 12, but also -2 times -6. This number appears positive. These down here either have to be both positive or both negative. In this case, they're going to be both negative. I've also, again, catching myself. Sorry, it's starting to all kind of run together here for me. I messed up here and did something you guys frequently do. I wrote 1 there instead of what A is. And that's a common mistake you guys made, and I just fell into it myself and don't have a real good excuse other than I just wasn't paying attention, which is normally y'all's problem as well. So I fixed that. That should be A. For those of you that were yelling at your screen going, "Hey, Mr. Mitchell, you did it wrong." Thank you. I, again, must have heard you subconsciously. So now that I get to that point, and I've thoroughly confused you, hopefully I haven't too much in actuality, I got to check those sideboards, see if they simplify, and one of them does this time, and that's that 3 over -6. And that's actually going to simplify to be 1 over 2, or 1 over -2 rather. I'm going to write it in a different color here. 1 over -2. So now I set up my parentheses. Top number gives me number of x's, bottom number is the constant, so I got 3x minus 2. And this one I'm going to use the simplified one, so I've got 1x, or just x minus 2. Do want to remind you, anytime you want to check yourself, you can certainly do that by multiplying that out, just like we did that first section when we were doing the distributive property. If we multiply it back out, we should get what we started with here, which is 3x squared minus 8x plus 4. 13. You've got to pay attention on 13 or you will miss it. The first thing you got to pay attention to is realize that x squared is not on the same side as all of the other stuff. If you miss that, you're going to goof up. And you'll try to use the star method as it is, and you're going to get the wrong answer. Don't do that. So the first thing you have to do is get everything on one side. Now, you can certainly move the x squared to the other side because that's the least amount of adding and subtracting work. But if you do that, you have to remember to factor out a negative, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but you do have to factor out that negative because a will be negative at that point. Or you can realize that I can move everything over to the other side and a will be positive that way and I don't have to worry about it. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do x squared, and then actually before I do that I'm going to write it like you guys should. So you're going to subtract 9x and you're going to add 20. But you're going to do that over here. So minus 9x and add 20. So you'll have x squared minus 9x plus 20 equals, since I took everything away from over here, I have 0. So that's my new equation I'm using. Now, I check for a GCF. All I've got's a 1 there, so I'm not going to have a GCF. Check for a difference of squares. I got more than two terms, so I go into my star method. A times C, which is 1 times 20, gives me 20. A goes on each side, which is actually 1 this time. And B, which is -9. Find factors of 20 that add to get me 9. So 1 times 20, 2 times 10, 3 doesn't work, 4 times 5. And I'm looking for a pair of those that I can use to get 9. It's going to be 4 and 5 on this one. It's got to be -4 and -5. Check to see if those sideboards simplify. They do not. So I'm going to set up my parentheses. X minus 4 and X minus 5. All right. So a little extra work on that one. I have to shrink that down a hair so that I've got room for the rest of my problems I got going on here. There we go, close enough. 14, again, I've got to notice I don't have everything on the same side. So I've got to make it on the same side. So subtract 50, subtract 50. So I get x squared plus 3x minus 54 equals 0. All right, so first thing I do, check for a GCF. I've got a equals 1 up there. There's not going to be anything that goes into all of them. So I check for a difference of squares. Doesn't have any. Then I go straight into my star method. A times C goes up there, so 1 times -4 is -4. A goes on each side, which again is actually 1. And then B is 3. So I'm trying to find factors in -4 that get me 3. So I got 1 and 4. And 2 and 2. Well, 2 and 2 definitely don't work, which leaves me with 1 and 4. But I need a positive 3 when I'm done. So what I'm going to use is a -1 and a positive 4. So when I add those two, that gives me positive 3. If you're not sure, you can always check with your calculator and do -1 plus 4. And see that gives you positive 3, and do -4 plus 1 and see that it gets you -3. If you're ever unsure which way it goes, you can always test it that way. So, next thing I'm going to do is check those sideboards to see if they simplify. These do not. So I'm going to use x minus 1, x plus 4. Do not forget to check those sideboards there. If you forget to check those, you will goof up on some of these. Don't goof up. All right, 15. Again, you have to pay attention and see that they're not all on the same side. So you have to move stuff. So I'm going to subtract 5 and add 5x. Subtract 5 and add 5x. So those will go away. So I got 2x squared plus 5x. And then I subtracted 5, so it's going to be plus 2. So I check for a GCF. It does not have one. Check for a difference of squares. It's more than two terms. So I go straight into my star method. Sorry if there's a glitch there. We had the Wi-Fi went down for a second. So, star method, A times C. So I've got 2 times 2, which is 4. Double checking here. There we go. So I do A, which is 2 this time, not 1, and B at the bottom, which is 5. So find factors of 4 that add to get me 5. So I got 1 and 4, 2 and 2. And this one I need 1 and 4. So 1, 4. I check those sideboards to see if they simplify. And that right one does. So I get 1/2 on this one. So I got to set up those parentheses. So I got 2x plus 1 and x plus 2. Alrighty. Hoping when you guys are seeing that stupid watermark's not in the way. It's not on mine, so I'm hoping it's not on yours either. We'll see. Alrighty. Let me set up our next section.